Maren Ostlund buried her mother on a Tuesday. By Friday, her brother had sold their mother's porch swing and the kitchen table for $40 to a man with a trailer. Maren stood at the screen door and watched him carry it all down the steps, and she didn't say a word. 3 days after that, at the repast, in front of 11 cousins, her brother Grady handed her a folded piece of paper. 30 days to leave the unit she'd lived in for 14 years. "You were the live and help, Maren," he told her, loud enough for the room. "Not an owner." So the next morning I took the dented coffee tin off Mom's shelf, the one she always said stays with me, and I drove to a lawyer I'd never met. If you've ever been treated as invisible by your own family, this story is for you. Before I take you into it, subscribe and comment the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this one travels. Then come back, because I'm going to tell you all of it. The $40, the paper, and the thing my mother left in that tin that none of them ever bothered to read. Let me start where it really starts. Not with Grady, with the house. 411 Ash Street, Hartwick, Ohio. A brick duplex on a corner lot, upstairs and down, with a shared porch across the front, and a maple that dropped helicopters all over the walk every spring. My parents bought it in 1979. I moved into the lower unit 14 years ago, and I never moved out. People say 14 years like it's a number. It isn't a number. It's 14 winters of getting up at 2 in the morning because I heard my father's cane hit the floor. It's the smell of liniment and the sound of a blood pressure cuff. I'm a home health aide by trade. I take care of other people's parents for a living. And when my own started to go, I didn't hire it out. I did it myself in that lower unit for wages that would make you wince. My dad had a stroke first, a big one, the kind that takes the words away before it takes the man. I learned to read his eyes. I learned which grunt meant water and which one meant turn me over, my hips on fire. I fed him. I shaved him. I sat with him at 3 in the morning when he was scared, and I held his good hand, and I told him lies about how he'd be walking by summer. He died in the front room in February. I was holding that hand when he went. Then it was Mom. Slower, with her. A long unspooling. Her mind came and went like weather. Some mornings she knew me. Some mornings she called me by her sister's name, the one who died in 1991. I answered to it. You learn to answer to whatever gets them calm. And the whole time, I paid. I want you to hear that part, because it matters later. I paid. When the roof started leaking over the upstairs bathroom, I paid the man to tear it off and lay new shingle. $3,100 out of an aide's checking account, and I ate rice for a month after. When the furnace quit on the coldest night of the year, quit like an old dog just lying down, I paid to replace it. And twice, the property taxes came due and there was no money in the estate to cover them. Because there was no estate, there was just me. And I paid those too. Once I put it on a credit card, I'm still carrying. Grady lived 4 states away the whole time. He'd call on Sundays. Mostly, he'd say, "How's Mom?" And I'd say, "She's failing. Grady, you should come." And he'd say, "I will." Things are just tight right now. Things were always tight with Grady. He had a way of being broke that felt like a personality. He came to the funeral. He did not come before it. I'm not telling you this so you'll feel sorry for me. I'm telling you so you understand what that house was. It wasn't a building. It was the last thing my parents built with their own hands, and I'd kept it standing with mine. There's a detail I need you to hold on to. Out on the porch, screwed to the post by the top step, there are house numbers. 411 brass. My father cut them himself, out in the garage, with a jeweler's saw and a file. One winter, when the store-bought ones looked cheap to him, he filed the edges smooth by hand. He countersunk the screws so they'd sit flush. When he screwed that last one to the post, he stepped back and looked at it the way some men look at a painting. 411. That's us, he said. That's the whole thing right there. Hold on to the numbers. We'll come back to them. Now, Grady. My mother passed on a Sunday night in her sleep, which is the one mercy in this whole story. Grady drove in Monday. And I want to be fair to him, because the truth is stronger than the grudge. For about a day, he was a brother. He hugged me in the kitchen, and we both cried. And he said, "You did everything, Mar. I know you did everything." For about a day. Then something turned in him, and I've thought a lot about when. I think it turned when he opened the hall closet and started counting. Grady counts. It's how his mind runs. He walked through that house the day after our mother died, and I watched him do arithmetic with his eyes. The furniture, the property, the lot. I could see it happening. Grief is expensive, and Grady's whole life has been about getting out from under expensive things before they cost him. Wednesday, 3 days out, I came back from the funeral home. There are 100 errands when someone dies, paperwork nobody warns you about, and the porch was empty. The swing was gone. My mother's porch swing. The one my dad hung on 2 chains for her 30th wedding anniversary, where she sat every evening she was able, right up to the last summer. Gone. And through the window I could see the kitchen was wrong. And it took me a second to understand why. And then I did. The table was gone too. The Formica table with the chrome legs. The one we ate every meal of our childhood at. The one with the cigarette burn near the corner from an uncle nobody talks about anymore. A man was backing a trailer out of the drive. Grady was standing there with 2 20s in his hand, folding them, putting them in his shirt pocket. $40. I said, "Grady, what did you do?" He said, "It's just stuff, Maren. It's clutter. We've got to clear the place out anyway. Might as well get something for it. The guy does estate cleanouts." He gave me $40 for the lot. $40 for the swing and the table. For the 2 things in that house my mother would have walked back through fire to keep. And you know what I did? I want to be honest with you about what I did, because it's the part I'm least proud of. I didn't say anything. I went inside. I stood at the counter where the table used to be, and there was a clean rectangle on the floor where the sun hadn't faded the linoleum in 40 years, and I stacked the last of the casserole dishes people had brought. Neighbors bring casseroles when there's a death. I stacked them and I scraped them, and I ran the water hot. And I let it be too hot on my hands on purpose, because the small pain was easier to hold than the big one. And I told myself, it's just stuff, like he said. It's just stuff. I was wrong about that. It wasn't just stuff. But I didn't have the fight in me yet. 14 years of caretaking will do that. You get so used to swallowing what you feel, so you don't upset the patient, that you forget you're allowed to feel it at all. Here's a thing I noticed that day and thought nothing of. I'll tell you because it becomes everything, though I didn't know it then. The old deed was still folded up in the dented coffee tin on the shelf over the stove. Same as always. It's an old Maxwell House tin, the paint half worn off, a dent in the side from before I was born. My mother kept paper, and her face did the thing. The oh no face. The realizing she's first face. She said the house, hon, Grady's got it listed. He told my Ronnie. As is, cash preferred, he wants a quick close. He said there's a company already sniffing around. Buys up whole blocks, pays cash, so there's no bank to slow it down. Listed. 411 Ash was listed, and I found out from Denise, standing in my own kitchen. Holding a foil pan of ziti, I went and found Grady. He was in the driveway on his phone, and he held up one finger to me like I was interrupting, and I waited, because that's what I do. I wait, and when he hung up I said, "You listed the house." He didn't even flinch. That's what I remember. No shame in it at all. He said, "Maren, we've been over this." He had not been over this with me. He said, "The estate has to be settled. There's debts. There's the funeral. You can't keep living here for free forever. You know that. For free." I said, "Grady, I paid the taxes. I paid for the roof. I paid for the furnace when it died in January. I've got the receipts. I paid. And he said the thing that told me exactly how he decided to see it. He said, look, you're a tenant now, technically, whatever you spent, that's between you and your conscience. But legally, you're a tenant. And there's a company, Blue Harbor, they want to move fast, and honestly, the fast money's the smart money. Don't make this ugly. A tenant. Technically, I want to tell you I fought him in that driveway. I didn't. I stood there and something in my chest folded up small. And I went back inside, and I finished cleaning out the fridge because it needed doing, and my hands needed something to do. That's the shape of me at this point in the story. Right and quiet. And if there's one thing I'd learned in 49 years, it's that being right doesn't count for a thing if nobody's listening. That was the belief I lived by. Hold that too, because it's the belief that nearly cost me everything. Now the repast. This is the part that still lives behind my eyes. A repast is the gathering after the burial. Food and family and everybody in their good dark clothes. We had it at the house, in the lower unit, because where else? 11 of them, cousins and second cousins, and an aunt by marriage. Denise and Grady, holding court by the window, telling stories about our mother that made him sound like a son who'd been there. And Josie. I have to stop and tell you about Josie, because in this whole story, she's the one clean thing. Josie's 16. She's Grady's daughter. And whatever her father is, that girl is something else entirely. She used to come stay 2 weeks every summer when she was small, back when things between Grady and me were only bad, not broken, and she'd sit on that porch swing for hours. She loved that porch. She'd read out there. She told me once it was the only place that ever felt still. She'd come in that day and gone straight to where the swing used to be, and stood looking at the 2 empty hooks in the porch ceiling, and I'd seen her face, and I'd had to look away. So, the repast. People are eating off paper plates, and Grady clinks a fork on a glass, actually clinks it, like a wedding, and the room goes quiet, and I feel it coming the way you feel weather in a bad knee. He says some words about Mom. Fine words, hollow ones. And then he turns, and he's got a folded paper out of his jacket, and he's holding it out to me across the room, and everybody's watching. And he says, Maren, I think it's best we keep this above board, in front of everybody, so there's no confusion later. And I take it, because 11 people are looking at me, and my hands move before my brain does. And I unfold it, and it's a notice to vacate. 30 days. My name on it. The unit I'd lived in 14 years, the room my father died in, 30 days to be out. And Grady says it, in front of all of them. He says, you were the live-in help, Maren, not an owner. Sign the notice. The live-in help. I have taken care of dying strangers for money and been treated better than that. I stood there in my mother's front room with the vacate notice shaking in my hand, and 11 of my own relatives looked at their paper plates, and not one of them said a word. Not Denise. Not the aunt. They studied their ZT. Because it's easier. Because Grady was loud, and I was quiet. And loud wins in a room like that. Loud always wins. One person moved. Josie, 16 years old. She put down her plate, and she walked across that whole silent room, past her father, and she came and stood beside me. Didn't say a thing. Just stood at my shoulder, so I wasn't standing alone. And she looked at her father, and her father looked away first. I'll remember that as long as I live. A child had more spine than a room full of grown adults. I didn't sign anything that day. But I didn't fight either. I folded the notice back up and I put it in my apron pocket, and I went and refilled the iced tea. Because somebody had to, and my hands needed a job. And people started leaving not long after, the way they do when the air's gone wrong, mumbling about the traffic. And Grady left too, back to his motel by the highway. And by dark it was just me and Josie and the paper plates. Josie helped me clean up. We didn't talk much. At the door, she hugged me hard, the way teenagers do when they've decided something. And she said, Aunt Maren, it's not right. And I said, no, honey, it's not. And she said, "So do something." And I didn't have an answer for her. That's the truth. At that point, I did not have an answer. It got worse before it got better. I told you there were 4 waves, and that was 3. Here's the 4th. Blue Harbor didn't wait for the ink to dry. That's how these outfits work, I learned later. They move like the deal's already done, because usually it is. Because usually the person on the other end is somebody like me, tired and outnumbered, and technically a tenant. Maybe a week after the repast, I came home from a client's. I was back working by then. I had to be. There's no bereavement leave for an aide, and there was a truck at the curb. And a man in a good jacket standing on my porch talking to 2 guys in work clothes, and one of the work guys had a drill. They were changing the locks on the upstairs unit. The man in the jacket introduced himself like we were at a mixer. Trent Vasco. Blue Harbor Property Group. Firm handshake, the kind men practice. He said, "You must be Maren," and he said it warm, and I hated how warm it was. He said, "We're just securing the upper unit, nothing to worry about. Standard procedure once we're under contract." And behind him, one of his guys was driving a sign into my mother's front yard, right into the grass by the maple. A big glossy sign. Blue Harbor. Coming soon. A phone number. I said, "You're not under contract." "Not really. There's an estate, And Vasco smiled and said, "It's all in motion, Maren. Your brother and I have an understanding. And honestly, between us, you're better off. Fresh start." He said fresh start to a woman standing in front of the house where both her parents died. Then he said the thing that made me understand the size of what I was up against. He was making conversation, feeling good. And he gestured up and down the street with his coffee cup and he said, "We're doing the whole block, you know. Corner to corner. Your lot's the corner. Corner's the anchor. Once we've got the corner, the rest falls in line. The whole block." 411 wasn't a house to him. It was a corner piece, a domino, the one that had to fall so the others would. I stood on my own porch while a stranger's drill chewed into the upstairs lock, and the sign creaked in the wind, and I felt about as small as a person can feel. And I did the only thing I had left to do, which was nothing. I went to the front post, and I put my thumb on the brass numbers my father cut by hand. 411, filed smooth, warm from the afternoon sun. I ran my thumb over them the way you touch a scar. And then I went inside my unit, and I shut the door. And I did not cry, because I was too far past it for crying. That was the bottom. I want you to know that was the bottom, because everything from here climbs. It climbed because of a coffee tin and a stack of funeral bills. Here's how it happened, and it's so ordinary it makes me shake to think how close I came to missing it. The bills. When somebody dies, there's a blizzard of paper, and somebody has to sit down and go through it, and Grady sure wasn't going to, so it fell to me. Same as everything. Funeral home. The hospice co-pays. A card from the crematory. I sat down at the counter one night, no table anymore, so I stood really at the counter, with all of it, to try and make sense of what was owed and out of what, because Grady kept saying the estate, and I wanted to see this estate he kept invoking, and I needed the deed, to know what we were even talking about, and the deed, I knew, was in the tin. So I took the dented Maxwell House tin down off the shelf, first time I'd really opened it in years, and I preed the lid, and it gave with that little metal sound, and there it was. My mother's paper life. Church bulletins, like I thought. Recipe cards in her hand. Her cornbread. Her chicken and rice. A funeral card for her own sister from 1991. And underneath all of it, folded in thirds, gone soft at the creases the way old paper does. The deed to 411 Ash Street. I unfolded it under the kitchen light to find the legal description, the parcel number, the boring parts. And there was another paper folded inside the deed. Stapled to it, actually. Newer than the deed, but not new. And it had a county stamp on it. A recorder's stamp with a date and a book and page number. The kind of stamp that means a thing is filed. Official. On the public record. And I started reading it, and I didn't understand it, and then I read it again slower, and the kitchen went very quiet around me. It was a right of first refusal. I didn't know those words then. I know them now. What it said in the plain part was this, that if the property at 411 Ash Street were ever offered for sale, one person had the right to buy it first, at the same price, by matching any real offer within 30 days of getting notice of that offer. And the person named, the person my mother had named and had gone down to the county and filed on the record years ago in her own careful hand on the signature line, was me. Maren Ostlund. Right of first refusal. Recorded, I put both hands flat on the counter, and I stood there and I read it a fourth time, because I did not trust my own eyes. My mother, who forgot my name some mornings at the end, who I thought had left nothing, who I thought hadn't understood what was coming, my mother had seen the whole thing. Years ago. She'd sat down when her mind was still whole and she'd thought, someday I'll be gone, and someday one of my children might try to sell this out from under the other. And she'd done the one quiet thing that would stop it. She'd filed a piece of paper, and she'd put it in the tin, and she'd told me, over and over, in words I was too dumb with grief to hear, the tin stays with me. This stays with me, Maren. She wasn't being sentimental about a coffee can. She was telling me where the key was. I sat down on the kitchen floor, right there on the cool linoleum, on the faded square where the table used to be, with that paper in my hand, and for the first time since my father's stroke, since all of it, I cried in a way that wasn't grief. I don't have a good word for what it was. It was like being seen. 14 years of being invisible, of being the help, of being technically a tenant, and my dead mother reached up out of a coffee tin and said, I saw you. I saw all of it, and I made sure. But I want to be careful here, because feeling isn't law, and I'd been fooled by my own hopes before. A stamp on a paper doesn't mean anything if the paper's no good. I needed to know if it was real, if it still worked, if it could stand. So the next morning, this is the morning from the very start, the one I opened with, I took the tin off the shelf, the whole tin, deed and clause and recipe cards and all, and I put it in a canvas bag, and I drove downtown to a lawyer I'd never met. Picked her out of a strip mall sign, honestly. Real estate and probate, it said. I didn't have money for a lawyer. I went anyway. Her name doesn't matter yet, but she mattered more than anyone in this story except my mother. She took the paper. She read it. She got quiet the way I'd gotten quiet. She turned to her computer and she pulled up the county records, the public ones, and she typed in the parcel number, and she found it. Right there. Book and page. Recorded all those years ago, exactly like the stamp said. She looked at me over her glasses, and she said the words I'll never forget. She said, Miss Ostlund, this was recorded. That means it runs with the land. Anyone who buys this property buys it subject to your right. And she scrolled, and she read, and she said, and I don't see anywhere that it was ever waived or released. It's live. It's still live. I said, so what does that mean? Say it plain. And she took off her glasses and she said it plain. She said, it means your brother cannot sell that house to anyone at any price without offering it to you first at that exact same price. It means if there's an offer on the table right now, you have 30 days from proper notice to match it and buy the property yourself. It means, Miss Ostlund, that as of the day this was recorded, the first person in line to own 411 Ash Street has always been you. And I sat in that strip mall office with my mother's coffee tin in my lap. And outside, somewhere across town, a Blue Harbor sign was creaking in my mother's front yard, and a stranger's lock was on the upstairs door. And my brother was at his motel by the highway counting money that wasn't his to count. And none of them knew. That's the thing you have to understand about where I'm leaving you. Not one of them knew. Grady didn't know. He'd never read the deed in his life. Presence was ownership. To Grady, being loud was the same as being right. Vasco didn't know. He'd skipped the deep title read to close fast. That was going to matter more than he could dream. Denise didn't know. The 11 who studied their ZD didn't know. Only me. Me and a dead woman. And a lawyer I'd met an hour ago. The lawyer slid a legal pad across the desk and clicked her pen and said, "All right. What's the offer they're working from? Do we know the number?" And I thought about the sign in the yard, and the drill in the lock, and $40 for my mother's swing. And you were the live-in help, Maren, not an owner. Sign the notice. I said, "I'll find out the number. Whatever it is, I want to match it." She started writing, and I sat up a little straighter in that chair than I'd sat in a long, long time. But here's what I didn't know yet. Sitting there, feeling the ground finally turn solid under me. A write on paper and a house in your hands are two different things. There was a number I hadn't seen. There was a clock I hadn't started. And there were two men who were about to find out that the quiet woman they'd written off had been holding the deed to the whole thing the entire time. And men like that don't lose quietly. The number, when I finally saw it, was $284,000. And I had 30 days. 30 days. I wrote the number on the back of my hand in the parking lot like a kid before a test. 284. I sat in the car and didn't start it for a while. Here's what a write on paper is. It's a key. It is not a house. A key doesn't buy anything. You still have to walk in and put the money down, and I did not have the money. I had a checkbook that hovered around 4 figures on a good month. I had an aide's wage and a car with 190,000 miles on it. So I want you to understand that when I walked back into that lawyer's office the next morning, I was not walking in rich. I was walking in with a clause and a stubborn streak and nothing else. The lawyer's name was Ruth Delgado. I'll say her name now because she earned it. She heard me out. Then she leaned back and she said the thing that changed the shape of my week. She said, "Maren, the right is the collateral. You are not asking a bank to gamble on you. You are asking them to lend against a property you have a recorded, senior right to acquire at a fixed price. That's not a wish. That's an asset." I didn't follow all of it. I followed enough. We went to a lender she knew. A small one, the kind with one branch and a manager who still reads the file himself. He read the deed. He read the recorded right. The book and page stamped in the corner by the county recorder's own hand. He got quiet the way people get quiet when the paper is stronger than they expected. He looked at me over his glasses, and he asked one question. He asked how long I'd lived there. 14 years, I said. I paid the furnace. I paid the back taxes twice. He nodded slow. He said, "That's not underwriting. But I'm going to remember you said it." The loan came together in 11 days. 11, Ruth pushed it, and I signed my name more times than I have ever signed anything, and the whole while I told no one. That was the plan, and the plan had rules. Rule 1. You do not warn a man like my brother. You do not warn a man like Vasco. Warned men lawyer up and dig, and I did not want them digging until it was too late to dig. So on day 12, I did the loud thing quietly. Ruth typed the notice. Formal as a church. Notice of exercise of the right of first refusal, recorded book and page, naming Maren Ostlund, electing to purchase 4111 Ash Street, Hartwick, Ohio, on the identical terms and at the identical price offered by Blue Harbor Property Group. $284,000. Cash, same close. We sent it certified. We sent copies to Grady, to the title company handling the Blue Harbor deal, and to Blue Harbor itself, care of Trent Vasco. We requested the probate file and the closing records the same day, in the same envelope, so nobody could later say I hadn't asked. Then I drove home to the lower unit, and I did the strangest thing. I taped a box, because Rule 2 was, let them think you're leaving. I want to tell you how that felt. Packing a house you have just moved heaven to keep. Wrapping my mother's plates in newspaper so my brother would look through the window and see a woman defeated. I put the good glasses in a carton and wrote kitchen on the side in marker. I stacked cartons by the door where Grady could count them. And every carton was theater. Every carton was a card I wasn't showing. The coffee tin I did not pack. The tin stayed on the shelf over the stove where it had lived my whole life. Some things you don't put in a box. The first crack came on a Tuesday. I know it was Tuesday because I was watching my regular client, an old man named Foster, who liked his lunch at noon exactly. My phone buzzed while I was cutting his sandwich. It was Ruth. She said the title company flagged it. There's a recorded encumbrance on the property, and they've stopped the Blue Harbor close. She said Vasco's people are, quote, requesting clarification. She said, Maren, they don't understand yet what they're looking at, but they know something's on the land. I finished cutting Foster's sandwich. I said it in front of him. He said, you look like you swallowed a canary. I said, Foster, eat your lunch. That was the near discovery, and it passed, because a flag is not a name. The title company knew a right existed. They didn't yet know it was live, unwaived, and mine to swing. Ruth confirmed by end of day that our notice had landed inside the window, time-stamped, certified, timely. The clock was ours. The relief of that. I sat in Foster's driveway and put my forehead on the wheel and breathed. Grady called that night. Right on schedule. You have to picture my brother to understand the call. Grady talks the way he sells. Fast, friendly, already at the finish. He said, Maren, hey listen, I hear you got some lawyers stirring things up. He laughed the salesman laugh. He said, I get it. Everybody grieves different. But you're making this ugly for no reason. The estate's the estate. Just sign the notice and be gracious about it, and I'll see you get a little something for your trouble. A moving stipend, call it that. A little something for my trouble. 14 years. And here is the part I'm proud of, because a younger me would have thrown it all across the phone. I said, Grady, I'm packing. You can see the boxes. He said, good girl, and I have never in my life wanted to hang up on a word so badly. Good girl. But I said I'm packing, and I let him believe it, because a man who thinks he's already won stops watching his own back. He said something about the movers coming for the rest of the furniture, and I said fine, and I hung up, and I sat in the quiet of that kitchen with the tin on the shelf, and I did not feel like a good girl. I felt like a woman with a loaded thing in her hand and the safety on. Escrow stalled the next week. Then it stalled again. That was cycle 2, if you're keeping track the way I was keeping track, marking days on the calendar over the stove with a pencil. Blue Harbor couldn't close because the title wouldn't clear, and the title wouldn't clear because there was my mother's right sitting on the record like a stone in the road. Vasco's people kept asking for the encumbrance to be explained or removed. Ruth kept explaining nothing. That's a skill, by the way, saying nothing back at expensive lawyers. She was good at it. She'd send one line. The encumbrance is valid and recorded. That's all. Let them lose sleep filling in the blank. And they did lose sleep. I know because of what happened in cycle 3. Denise told me. Of course it was Denise. Denise is the family newspaper. She can't hold a fact for an hour. And 3 days after Mom's right stopped that sale cold, Denise called me all breathless. She said, Maren, you will not believe the drama. She said Trent Vasco is beside himself. Denise had it from Grady, and Grady had it from Vasco, because Vasco had started calling Grady at all hours. See, here's what I'd learned by then, piece by piece, the way you learn anything when you go quiet and pay attention. Blue Harbor wasn't buying one duplex. Vasco was buying the whole block. Ash Street, corner to corner. He had 6 other closings lined up, and a bank behind him financing the assembly. And that bank's money was built on him delivering all of it. Every parcel. And 411 was the corner lot. You can't assemble a block with a hole in the corner. The corner is the whole game. So without my mother's little house, Vasco didn't have a block. He had 6 houses and a hole and a bank asking hard questions. His lawyer combed the record for a way out. Ruth heard it through the title company. They were looking for a waiver. Anywhere. Any scrap of paper where I or my mother had ever signed the right-of-way. A release. A quitclaim. Anything, because if the right had ever been waived, the sale to Blue Harbor stood, and I got nothing. They didn't find one. There wasn't one. My mother never waived a thing in her life she meant to keep, and she meant to keep this. That was the trap arming. I could almost hear it, the way you hear a clock you've stopped noticing. Vasco's financing hung on the corner. The corner hung on a right he couldn't remove, and the right was mine. But I told you at the start, men like that don't lose quiet. And before the good part, there was a bad night. There's always a bad night. It came at the 3-week mark, with 9 days left on my clock. And it came in the driveway, in person, because Grady had flown in. He didn't knock. He never knocked at that house. It had been his house as a boy, and he still walked in, like the deed said Ostlund, without ever once asking which Ostlund. He came through the side door into the lower unit, and he was not the salesman anymore. The friendly was gone. He had a look I remembered from when we were kids, and he'd broken something and needed it to be my fault. He said, "What did you do?" I said, "I made an offer, Grady, same as anybody." He said, "You're sabotaging me. You've got Vasco threatening to walk from the entire deal. Do you understand what that does to me?" He's saying the title's dirty. He's blaming me. He put money out already, Maren, on the strength of that block. And if it falls apart, I am on the hook for it, and it is your fault. And then he said the thing meant to end it. He said, "I'll contest the probate. I'll drag this out 2 years and you'll spend every dime you don't have on lawyers and you'll still lose. Because I'm the executor. I'm the son. And you were the help." He was breathing hard. His face was red the way our fathers used to get before the stroke. And for one ugly second I saw the resemblance, and it frightened me. I'm going to be honest about that night, because I promised you honest. He got to me, not with the threat, with the arithmetic, because I'd lain awake doing the math myself. 9 days. A loan that was approved but not yet funded to close. A close that couldn't happen until the title cleared, and Grady now threatening to gum the probate so nothing cleared at all. What if he could stall it past my 30 days? What if the window ran out while lawyers argued? A right that expires is just a piece of paper about the past. I sat on my mother's kitchen floor that night after he left, the tin down in my lap, and I was not sure. For the first time since I'd found it, I was not sure the numbers would hold. I called Ruth at 7 the next morning. I said, "Can he run out my clock?" And Ruth Delgado, God bless her flat, calm voice, said, "No." She said, "Your election is already made. It's exercised. It's time-stamped. It's certified inside the window." The 30 days was to elect. You elected. He can contest the estate until he's blue, but he cannot unring your notice, and he cannot sell the corner lot to Blue Harbor over a senior recorded right he has no waiver against. She said, "Maren, the probate fight is a bluff. Contesting the estate doesn't touch your right. It runs with the land. It doesn't care who the executor is." I made her say it twice. She said it twice. And that was the morning the fear went out of me and did not come back. Because I finally understood what my mother had done. She hadn't left me a wish. She hadn't left me a favor to beg from Grady. She'd left me a right that stood on its own 2 feet and didn't need anybody's permission. Not the executors, not the sons, not the flippers. It just was, on the record, in ink, book and page, stamped by the county the year I turned 39, and never knew. We funded. We closed. Ruth handled it like she was buttering toast. The lender wired the money into escrow. The certified check for $284,000 was cut in my name, and the deed to 4111 Ash Street ran to Maren Ostlund, sole owner, on a Thursday afternoon, while I was sponging Foster's kitchen counter 4 miles away. Nobody knew yet. That was the last piece of the plan, and it was mine, and I'd earned it. I asked Ruth for one thing. I asked her to wait until the family gathered, because Denise, of course, had already scheduled the gathering. The closing news party. Blue Harbor was supposed to have closed that week, and Grady had promised everybody a check was coming, and Denise was throwing a little supper at her place to, quote, celebrate the estate finally settling. Ziti again. Denise only knows the one dish. Grady was flying back in for it. He was going to stand in Denise's dining room in front of the same 11 faces that watched him hand me the vacate notice, and he was going to announce the sale. Ruth and I decided we'd let him. I wore the same cardigan I'd worn to the repast. On purpose. Small thing. Mine. I got there late so the room was already full. Ziti steaming on Denise's table, the good folding chairs out, the cousins in their church-adjacent clothes. Josie was there, 16 in the corner with her phone, and when I came in she looked up and something in her face got careful and hopeful at once. She was the only one who'd stood beside me at the repast. She was watching to see if standing there had been worth it. Grady was holding court. He had a manila folder and a big color in his cheeks, and he was mid-sentence about, and I quote, closing out Mom's estate the right way, when I came in and set my purse down. He gave me a look. Generous almost, he thought I'd come to surrender in public, the way he'd made me kneel in public before. He actually pulled out a chair for me. Sit, Maren. This concerns you too. I sat. Ruth came in behind me a minute later, and nobody knew who she was. Denise asked if she was from the bank. Ruth said, in a manner of speaking, and took the chair beside me and set a slim folder on the table, and, on top of it, my mother's dented Maxwell House coffee tin. I'd brought the tin. That was mine to bring. Grady saw it, and something flickered, but he kept going. He said, so the sale to Blue Harbor is finalizing this week, and after costs there will be a distribution. And he named a figure to the cousins that made them nod and murmur. And he said, Maren's been given every consideration, and there's a stipend for her relocation. Very generous of the estate. He looked around the table, collecting his little nods. He was good at the nods. He'd always been good at the room. And when he finished, Ruth Delgado opened her folder. She didn't raise her voice. She has never in her life raised her voice. She laid one document on Denise's tablecloth, turned so the table could read it, and she said, before anyone celebrates a sale, they should know it isn't happening. She said, this is the recorded deed to 411 Ash Street. And stapled inside it, recorded with the county in this book and at this page, is a right of first refusal filed by Maren Ostlund, naming her daughter Maren. It says that if the property is ever sold, Maren may purchase it first, at any price offered by any buyer, within 30 days. The room went the particular quiet of a room that doesn't understand yet, but knows the temperature just dropped. Then I did the thing I'd driven all those miles for. I didn't stand. I didn't gloat. I slid 2 pieces of paper across Denise's tablecloth, the stamped notice, and the copy of the certified check, and I said the one sentence I'd been saving. The only sentence. I said, I already matched the offer. The house is mine. Denise, who'd known about the listing before I did, who'd let it slip and set this whole thing rolling, Denise read the clause out loud, because she can't not read a thing out loud, and her voice cracked on the word Maren, right there in the middle of the right, naming me. The account she'd opened at the repast, tenant, help, not an owner, closed in her own mouth in front of the same eyes. Now, Grady. Grady stood up so fast his chair went over. He said the sale still stands. He said it twice, louder the second time. He said, the estate agreed to sell to Blue Harbor. We have a signed agreement, you can't just. And Ruth let him run out of road before she answered. She said, the sale routes to Maren. Your agreement set the price and the terms. She matched them exactly. $284,000, the number you agreed to, the number you signed. The property sells at that price to the holder of the senior right. That's your buyer now. That's her. And you could watch it land on him. You could watch the whole plan turn inside out in his face. Because the fast cash he'd rushed everything for, the quick close, the $40 table, the vacate notice, all of it had been to get money fast. And now the sale was going through at the exact price he'd set, and every dollar of it went to buy the house for me. And there was nothing at the end of it for him but the number he'd chosen himself. His own price. Turned around and handed back is the thing that beat him. He said, I was handling the estate. I was doing what needed. I was the executor. I was. And it just stopped. It died in the middle, the way a thing dies when the man saying it hears it too. I was the son. As if the son and the record were the same thing. They were never the same thing. He just never had to learn that before. And in the quiet after his sentence fell apart, Josie stood up from her corner, and she carried her chair across Denise's dining room, past her own father, and she set it down next to mine and she sat. 16 years old. She didn't say anything, she just moved her chair. And that, out of everything that happened that day, that's the one I still can't talk about without my throat closing. Then Vasco. He wasn't at the supper, but his part came the same week, and I'll give it to you here because it belongs with the rest. Trent Vasco called Ruth. Then Vasco came to Ruth's office, and he asked me to come too, and I went, because I wanted to see it. He was smooth. Flippers are always smooth, it's the whole job. He sat across the table, and he explained, kindly, like I was slow, that this was all a misunderstanding. That Blue Harbor could still make everyone whole. And he named the trouble he was in without meaning to. His block. 6 other closings. A bank. The corner lot he couldn't do without. And Ruth, quiet Ruth, said the thing that made him flush. She said, the right was recorded years ago. It was on the public record the entire time. Any deep title search would have caught it. She let that sit. She said, you skipped the search to close fast. He didn't answer, which was its own answer. He'd bet on speed over reading the file, same as Grady. And the record doesn't care how fast you are. It just sits there, being true, waiting for the one person who bothers to read it. Then Vasco tried the last card. He asked to buy my unit, my half of my mother's house, the lower unit, the one I'd nursed 2 people to death in. He offered a premium, a number over market. He said everyone wins, you get a windfall, I get my corner. And he actually smiled like he'd solved it. I thought about the 2 empty hooks in the porch ceiling where the swing used to hang. I thought about $40. I named him a price. I named him a number so far past what any block assembly math could ever bear that it wasn't really a number. It was a door closing, and he knew it. And I watched him understand that I'd made it exactly high enough to say no in a way that couldn't be argued with. He'd taught me that trick himself in a way. I just needed the once. I stood up. I said, thank you for coming, Mr. Vasco, and I held the door for him, all the way open. And he walked through it, and Blue Harbor's block died on the corner of Ash Street the same way it was born. Quietly, on paper, over a thing nobody bothered to read. 8 months later. I want to leave you on the porch, because that's where this always lived. It's morning. Early spring, the light coming up soft and gold over Ash Street, and the maples got its first green on it. The Blue Harbor sign is long gone. I pulled it out of the grass myself the week I closed, and I put it out with the recycling, and I didn't feel a thing, which surprised me. I thought I'd feel something. I just felt the shovel. The porch post is repaired. It had gone soft at the base from years of nobody minding it, and I had a carpenter set a new one, good pressure-treated wood. And I sanded it and painted it the same gray my father used. And then I took the brass numbers out of the coffee tin, where I'd kept them wrapped in a dish towel since the day Vasco's crew pried them loose, and I screwed them back onto the post myself. 411. My father hand filed those numbers after his first stroke, when his right hand shook. And if you run your thumb down the edge of the 4, you can still feel where the file skipped. I feel it every time I come up the steps. I do it on purpose. The upstairs unit is rented now. I rent it to a young nurse, a girl about the age I was when I first moved home to take care of my mother. And she works nights at the county hospital, and she waters the ferns, and she pays on the first. And she has no idea she's living in the middle of a war. That's how I like it. A house should forget its wars. There's a new swing on the porch. I hung it from the 2 old hooks. Same hooks Grady sold the last one off of, $40 to a man with a trailer, and I left the hooks up all this time empty because I knew that someday I'd have something to hang from them again. Josie's on it right now as I'm telling you this. 16 turned 17. She's got her homework in her lap and one foot pushing the swing slow and her coffee going cold on the rail next to mine. Because she takes it with too much milk, and she comes on the weekends now, most weekends, and neither of us makes a thing of it. She just shows up. She moved her chair once. She's been moving toward that porch ever since. The coffee tin is back on the shelf over the stove. Dented. Cheap. Worth nothing. Worth everything. My mother used to say it stays with me, and I never once asked her what she meant. I know now. She wasn't talking about the tin. Grady called last month. First time since Denise's. He didn't apologize, that's not in him, but he'd worked his way around to needing something, which is the only reason Grady ever calls. He was short again, he always is. He asked, careful, roundabout, if there was any way I could see clear to helping him out. Alone. Family, he said. We're still family. I stood in that kitchen with the tin on the shelf and the numbers my father cut catching the light through the window, and I didn't say anything ugly. I'm done with ugly. I just said the truest thing I know. I said, Mom left the tin with me, Grady. Turns out she knew which of us would read it. And I let him sit with that. And then I said, take care of yourself. And I meant it, and I hung up, and I went out on the porch and sat down next to Josie and picked up my cold coffee and looked out at Ash Street, coming green in the morning. Here's the whole of it. Everything I've got. The only thing I learned worth passing on. What people build with their hands and pay for with their years, it doesn't sign away as easy as it sells. My father cut those numbers by hand. My mother filed that right by hand. I paid that furnace and those taxes with 14 years of my life. And a man came through with a folded paper and $40 and thought that was enough to erase all of it, because he'd never once bothered to read what the people who loved him had already written down. Read the paper. That's it. That's the whole secret. Somebody who loved you may have already stood between you and the wolf, years ago, in ink, and left it where they knew you'd look. My mother did. She left it on the shelf over the stove, in a dented coffee tin, and she said it stays with me. And she was right. Come sit on the porch anytime. There's room on the swing. And tell me the city you're watching from. I'd like to know how far this one travels. How many of you have a tin on a shelf you haven't looked in yet?